Okay, I think we should get started. We may have some more people joining in a few minutes. So once again, very happy that all of you are joining us this afternoon for another big conversation. Today it's about a tale of two cities, global learning in The Hague and Miami. And I'd like to extend a very warm welcome to our guest speakers, Jos Beelen and Stephanie Doscher, all the way from Florida. It's amazing that we can make it work like this. And I'll give a proper introduction in a few minutes. But once again, we're also joined by some of our external guests from other institutions in the Netherlands and abroad. And for all those reasons, obviously, we'll be using English as a medium of conversation. My name is Eveke de Lauw, and I'll be facilitating the session today. And let me first of all briefly introduce the two speakers. As you know, obviously, Dr. Jos Beelen, he's our Professor of Global Learning at the Hague University of Applied Sciences, heading a research group of the same name. And he's also a member of the Publications Committee of the European Association for International Education. And we're very happy that Stephanie Doscher is joining him in today's conversation. She works at Florida International University in Miami, and she's the director of the Office for Global Learning Initiatives there. She's also the co-author of a publication of in 2018, Making Global Learning Universal, Promoting Inclusion and Success for All Students. So we're very happy that you can join us today, Stephanie. Now, what is interesting about today's conversation is that both The Hague and Florida International University focus on global learning, yet they conceptualize it in very different ways, and they use different tools and strategies to achieve this. Both Jos and Stephanie will explore why global learning is relevant in their different contexts, what it means and how they make it work. And so we have split the big conversation into three topic rounds, where both Jos and Stephanie will share a few of their thoughts with us, followed by a brief Q&A. And afterwards, we'll have plenty of time to have a more in-depth discussion. However, before I hand over to Jos and Stephanie, just a few practical issues. I already asked you in the chat to mute your microphone, and maybe you would like to turn off your camera as well, because it just benefits the quality of the session. If you do have any technical problems, let me know in the chat box. But a kind reminder not to click through the slides, because otherwise the presenters will get very confused. If you have any questions during the discussion Q&A, then I'd like to ask you to first type in your comment or question in the chat box, as we're joined by quite a few people today. So I can sort of try and moderate the discussion a little bit, and I'll just call on you to pass the floor to you, so you can provide a little bit of background to your question. You may have also noticed that I've started recording this session, and after the big conversation, we'll share the link with you. But I'd also like to remind you that this will be shared on a YouTube channels to make sure that our external guests can also watch the recording. So if you don't want to be in this video recording, then I would suggest that you don't turn on your microphone or camera throughout the session. So that is as far as the practical items are concerned, and without much further ado, I'd like to hand over to our presenters, and I think Jos, you're the first one to take the floor.
Yes, thank you, Eveke, for your introduction and for moderating. And once again, welcome, Stephanie. Always a pleasure to work with you and to cross swords on global learning and what it means in our different contexts. As Eveke said, what's in a name? We both use the term global learning, but we are here in this session to unpack what it really means for each of us. And since we collaborate, I can already tell you that we have a number of things in common when we work with global learning. So when we talk about the question why global learning is important, I came across this text. Over recent years, a harsher political and social context for global education has emerged. And then the year is 2005. And I was just wondering, with the world being on fire right now and standing still at the same time, what would we write now in 2020? So when I was appointed professor of global learning 2 years ago, I have to confess that the first thing I did is trying to find out what global learning really was, because it's not a term that is currently much in use in the Netherlands or even in Europe. So I had to find out how people thought about this and what the rationales were for global learning. And I found again this slide from my inaugural lecture in September 2018. And this was one of the lists I made of reasons, rationales, why global learning is important, both locally and globally, and in their interconnectedness. And I thought, well, now 2 years later, almost 2 years later, all these items are more relevant than ever, maybe. And so we already asked ourselves, is the balance shifting? Has the West lost it? Mahbubani from Singapore published a book with that title in 2018. And I think that some of you may argue that indeed the West has lost it over the past few months. But that's maybe a very pessimistic view. Mythos versus logos. I spoke at the time about vaccinations and genetically modified organisms. And I think that whole discussion of science versus opinion has resurfaced in a mega way during the COVID-19 crisis, with people suggesting bleach and the most bizarre solutions that would provide a cure for the virus. I think we have also seen rising nationalism and populism. And I think that is exactly what we want to prevent through global learning, because we need to collaborate internationally. And that's not probably something that I need to convince you of, but some others will need convincing. What we've also seen is a research in a number of mechanisms. For example, pedophrasty, which is showing pictures with children in them in order to make your point more powerfully. We have also seen bigoteering, meaning that you blow something out of proportion. So for the least cause you can think of, you would call someone a racist, for example. And there is also such a thing as secondary bigoteering. That is when you agree with someone without looking really at that person's opinion, but just agreeing because she is a woman or he is a man. Presentism, that is looking at the past with today's values. I saw, Stephanie, in the news here, some messages about a statue of General Lee in the southern states. And again, the discussion was, should you remove that or should you place it in the context of today and say, well, we do not believe that General Lee had very sound beliefs when it came to slavery. Mm-hmm. We've seen a lot of these issues appear locally as well. So people going out into the streets of Amsterdam and changing street names, for example. And so all these mechanisms have a global and a local variety. Polarization, happening in our classrooms also. And then technology. Well, technology has basically saved us, but if you look at technology over the past few weeks, it is also presented a number of dangerous So in summary, this is why I think that global learning is important for all our students and for us in order to deal with these developments.
Beautiful.
Over to you, Stephanie.
Thank you, thank you. Okay, beautiful. I love that you're doing the controlling piece, and I'll let you know when to advance the next slide. Thank you again, Evika and Jos, for inviting me to engage in this conversation today. It's true. I love the dialogue that we've been having, Jos, in writing, and now it's an opportunity to do it with our colleagues. So I think one of the things that we really do have in common is that global learning, well, two things in common. First of all, I didn't know what it was when I was hired by Florida International University either. And the second is that there is this local global connection. So in 2008, I was hired to help direct what would become our university-wide Global Learning for Global Citizenship initiative. But that was not what it was called in 2008. The idea was to internationalize the international university. Florida International University is the only university in the US with international in its name. And we opened our doors in 1972. It was to the largest opening day class in the history of higher ed in the United States. We had about 4,500 students on the first day of classes at the university. And at that time, they were only upper division students that were in their third and fourth year. And the founding of FIU was very important for South Florida, because at that time, if you wanted to go to university, the only option that you had was the private university, University of Miami. And there was a law in the state of Florida that all citizens needed to have access to a public institution of higher education within 50 miles of their home. So the founders of our institution, when they were granted the land upon which they could build this institution, were thinking a lot about context of the time, but they were also casting their eyes towards the future. And our founding president said in a number of speeches, we're developing a new university for new Americans. In 1972, we were just seeing the influx of many new Americans coming from Central South America that would grow exponentially in the future. We're now 70% Latin American Hispanic in South Florida. But we had three founding goals. The first was education of students. The second, service to our community, because once again, the institution was really founded to serve, to be an anchor institution for our locality. We educate most of our teachers. We educate most of our county government officials. We are an economic, civic, and social mobility engine for our community, so very locally based. But then there's this third goal, greater international understanding. And this was a vision of what FIU could be that was wholly different from the other now 11 universities in the state university system. There was this understanding that Miami is a global crossroads. It's known as the gateway to the Americas. It is a dynamic, evolving, really global city. So our founders saw some kind of connection between learning, engagement with our local community, but also engagement with our interconnected international and global community. And what they envisioned was that every single student at FIU would have some sort of internationalized learning experience. And at first that was envisioned as study abroad. Most of the people who founded our institution had been educated in in private institutions or public institutions that were primarily residential. These were very well-educated scholars who thought of the education of the future in the way that they were thinking of their past, as you were saying earlier, Jos. And so they envisioned that everyone would have a study abroad, everyone would have a working or internship or service experience that would engage them in travel. And very soon they found out that our student body simply can't engage in that way, because our student body is a little bit older. At that time, they were primarily women who were attending FIU. These were women with children, with work responsibilities. Even now, the majority of our students work 20 or more hours a week. The options in terms of just time and the ability to fund through time, through effort, it just wasn't possible. So by 1980, already the leaders were saying, well, maybe we need to let go of this idea. Fast forward to 2008, when we were hired to reinvigorate the I in FIU. And the way we did it was to ultimately create, develop, design, and implement a university-wide global learning initiative. So the first thing I want to do now is share with you how we define global learning. So that would be the next slide. So at FIU, our North Star is how we conceptualize what global learning is. And we don't think of it in terms of where you learn or what you learn, but it's how you learn. It's a process that engages diverse people, their diverse perspectives, whether those are cultural, disciplinary, gender-based, they could be time-based, values, diverse people, bringing their diverse perspectives into a collaborative space to analyze, to understand, and to address complex problems that transcend borders of difference. This is grounded in the history of our institution, that there's an understanding that our local lives are embedded in a global reality, and that there is a deep interconnection amongst the local perspectives and global perspectives that form our lives. And in order to conceptualize our interdependence and interrelatedness, in order to engage and see the world through multiple perspectives, which we call global perspective, in order to develop a transformative willingness to engage in this kind of problem solving, we need to engage in the process of global learning, which doesn't happen by virtue of doing any certain thing. It happens by design. So I'll pause there.
Thank you, Stephanie. Are there questions at this point?
So yes, we invite any questions or comments from you as participants. I think Laurence.
Hello.
Hi, Stephanie. Hi,
Hello.
Jos. Thank you very much. Yes, I have a question. It's about the way you define global learning. If you have a high quality education, should it be the way you should let students learn? Actually, global learning says, okay, we have to discuss problems and complex issues. We are doing collaborative working, group problem solving. on these issues, and these are global issues that perhaps have a repercussion on local issues and things like that. But I mean, shouldn't be the purpose of education at all to do this?
Yes. Yes. That is our perspective, that global learning as a process is really just good teaching and learning with a local global connection. I mean, it's kind of the I wouldn't say it's the hidden truth, right? So when faculty come to our workshops, that's their takeaway. Wait a second, this is just good teaching and learning, what we should always be doing for all students in higher education. And I love it when that's the takeaway. That's the perspective that we come from. So as leaders of this global learning initiative at FIU, both I and my colleague come from our College of Education. This is a curriculum and co-curriculum initiative. It's not that common for educators to lead global learning initiatives, at least not in the US. And so our perspective from the very beginning was that this would be a curriculum and co-curricular design initiative, and that faculty development was fundamental to it, which is something that I'll be chatting in just a minute. So again, yes, it's good teaching and learning for all students. Yes.
Okay, thank you, Laurence, for your question. Jos, anything to add, or maybe the other questions?
I fully agree with Stephanie on this, because if you look at maybe use the term also relevant education, then I think it is logical that you include all relevant aspects, including the international dimension and the intercultural dimension.
Okay, I think we have one more question from our colleague, Ms. Makinwa.
Yes, thank you. Hi. To follow up on Laurence's question, I work for an international and European law program with a very, very diverse student body. We have about maybe 50, 60 students from different nationalities at any given time. So I've tried to understand what global learning means within the context of a program that is already very international. So does it have more to do with the articulation of problems that are associated with a global age, and fashioning those into themes and making sure that students are addressing these social these social issues that result from globalization? Is that really what this is about? Because I think we sometimes get confused and think that global learning is about, as you pointed out when you started, about going to do some studies in the States, or being in a different environment. So could you, and I think there's a bit of confusion in terms of curriculum design and the curriculum discussions when we are looking at this, and I wonder if you could elaborate a little bit more on this. Thank you.
Jos, would you like to take this one first?
Yeah, what I can say, Abiola, is that most of global learning takes place at home, meaning at your home university. It is about issues and, if you wish, wicked problems that are global and local, but I think it is also interdisciplinary work. And so how disciplines can work across disciplinary boundaries in order to address those issues. And we know that perspectives from other disciplines are often as powerful as perspectives that come across borders. Another aspect is that the international dimension and the intercultural dimension for us at the Hague University of Applied Sciences are tools to achieve global citizenship, because that is our institutional aim, that all our graduates are not only professionals, but also global citizens. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later on, but this is a first reaction. Would you like to add, Stephanie?
Yes. Yeah. Brilliant question. Both questions are really important. So we think it's about, no, I don't mean to say we think. How we think about global learning in our institution is that it's more about connections than it is content. It's about connection making at its heart. And we use the Indian, from the subcontinent, aphorism of the blind people and the elephant. So when we think about the issues that we face at local level and also at international, global, national scales, at multiple scales, so complex, so interrelated that no one individual, discipline, approach, group can understand, much less solve them by themselves. So if you ask each person who is blinded, what is an elephant, they'll each give you a different answer. To understand the wholeness of the elephant, we have to connect parts of each idea. And this gets at, and again, I will also discuss this a little bit more. This gets at the purpose, the mission of higher education, which is to exchange and produce new knowledge. So how can we in the classroom intentionally design experiences where our diverse students, even if they look the same, they may not think the same, and people who look very different think very similarly. It's about perspectives. How can we bring together parts of different ideas and recombine them into new ideas and understandings? 1 + 1 = 3. So global learning is as much about the production of new knowledge, or more so than it is about the reiteration of existing knowledge, connection making.
Thank you very much for wonderful responses and a great question as well. I think we should move on to the next topic. She now explained why global learning is relevant. So I think I'll hand over back to Jos for a moment.
Yes, thank you. We're going to talk about what global learning means in the context of our universities. And Stephanie already mentioned the rationales behind the founding of Florida International University. I think what matters for us is that we are a university of applied sciences and that we try to have very close links with the world of work. But I also recognize what you said about social mobility, because we also operate in a very diverse society. And we have many students who are the first in their families to enter higher education, and they would rather go to a University of Applied Sciences than to a research university. So there is some similarities in the aim, the mission of our institutions. But if you look at global learning and internationalization in each of our institutions, you can, I think, only understand where we come from if you take the context into consideration. And if you look at the geographical context, I found this picture where you have the Netherlands, Belgium, and Luxembourg, plus Switzerland, put into Florida, and still there is space left. So 4 countries, granted that Luxembourg is minuscule, but still. So that geographical context is quite different. And we are, on the other hand, can almost cycle into neighboring countries. And that since the 1980s has been a policy in Dutch higher education, working with Germany and Belgium. And the picture you see here was very short a while ago, when it certainly wasn't possible to bike into Belgium. And so our internationalization is determined by the opportunity that within a very close distance you can find other languages and cultures.
Mhm.
And we also saw what Stephanie also mentioned, that students do not have the opportunity to go abroad, and not so much in our case because of financial barriers. We have the Erasmus system, but there is often a mentality, a mindset that that is not for them or it is not important. Mm-hmm. So our tradition is that we come from internationalization at home. Purposeful is a key word here, meaning that we will start with the outcomes and not with just the activities, as is a tradition in internationalization. Huh? It must be good, let's do some internationalization activities, but we don't know what the result is intended to be. And another important element is that we want to target all students. And I like very much to play around with these definitions and, for example, merge Stephanie's definition, which includes the collaborative, which is very important, and the local and the global, into internationalization at home, or the other way around, because they do aim to achieve the same things. And in reality, most of the global learning happens in the home university. So the domestic learning environment that this definition mentions. If we look at internationalization at home, we say that we look at three aspects of the curriculum: the formal curriculum, which is in the classroom, the learning outcomes; the informal is the campus, and I think we sorely miss now that informal component. How can we have an informal curriculum online? It's very difficult. But mostly the hidden curriculum, meaning all those assumptions and traditions that we grew up with, and therefore we take them for granted. We never talk about them, but there are some deep assumptions in there. And so what knowledge do we value? Is that male knowledge from the 19th century? How do we teach? How do we learn? And we grew up with a particular system and educational values. But then again, Stephanie mentioned perspectives. We need those outside perspectives to make the hidden curriculum visible for us. So that is the tradition that we come from. And now over to you again, Stephanie.
Okay, I want to kind of double down on the at-home concept. I do have a question about, I'm now thinking about what do we even mean by home? Yes. Are we thinking about Europe? Are we thinking about our home community? Are we thinking about what do we mean by home? So maybe we can discuss that a little bit more as well. But doubling down on the context of our institution and how we engage in global learning in our different institutions. So I think I mentioned earlier that our initiative was originally called Internationalizing the International University. Then we embraced the idea of global learning for global citizenship, and we determined design elements of what would be defined as a global learning course or global learning activity at FIU. And still, in all honesty, we had not articulated the words that I just shared with you, the definition in a concise way that people could see themselves in. We didn't really coalesce that definition until about 2014, 2015. It was very much grounded in our intra-institutional research into what is transforming perspectives in our classroom. We have these design elements, but what is it about them that really that creates the generation of new perspectives and new knowledge in the classroom? And then in about 2016, we asked ourselves, wait a minute, where did this term global learning come from, right? I mean, we've been reading it, people are starting to embrace it, but where did it first originate? And in our research, we spent about 1.5 years conducting research. We have found, this is the earliest reference that we have found so far, and I would love it if there's an even earlier one, but it was in the founding of the United Nations University, which had its charter signed in the early 70s. And there were 3 divisions of the UNU. And one of them was the Global Learning Division. And interestingly, the vice rector of that division was someone who was an early scholar of communication, using technology to communicate across borders. But the origin of the term, the global piece, was that this would be an interdisciplinary division of scholars located around the world that would be determining what are the global issues of our time that we need to address. The learning piece was brought in as a deliberate double entendre. What are the educational processes that we need to instigate and facilitate in order to understand and address these problems? So you can imagine our shock when we found that the origin of the term had those same underlying dynamics: complex problems, teaching and learning, interdisciplinarity, and borders, right? Transcending borders. The real shock came in when we made a connection between the founding of the United Nations University. The charter was signed by the then Secretary General, U Thant. And here before you, you see a photograph of the groundbreaking of FIU. The guest of honor was U Thant. So global learning was in that hidden curriculum since the founding of our university. And it was in this process of engaging in conversation with our faculty and our students and our community and our alumni to ask, what is an appropriate education? What does it look like? What should our graduates know and be able to do? That we kind of uncovered this hidden underlying curriculum that was there the whole time. And if you go to the next slide, and I'll be very brief so we have plenty of time for some more conversations. In the next slide, I put in animations, I shouldn't have done that. Yeah, so internationalizing, the mission of the institution is to exchange and produce new knowledge. And so when we think about what internationalization is, I embrace a definition from Gabriel Hauwini, who was a director of INSEAD. And his idea was, it's about integrating the institution with the world's emerging, constantly emergent knowledge production and learning network. So how do we connect our people, our programs, ideas with the world's network, just like the United Nations University does? And the way we do that is through this universal global learning mindset that has come to infuse not only our teaching, but our service, our research, even how we lead many of our organizational structures. And I'll pause there.
Okay.
A reaction to what you mentioned about the at home, Stephanie. That is indeed contested. What is at home? For whom? Suppose you are a student that stays at home, meaning in your own city, but you study at an offshore campus of a UK university. Then you are at home, but you're studying at an international foreign university. So the home is contested. And I think also when it comes to online learning, who is at home? And so we've been discussing the notion of the third space as a learning environment between several homes. So I'm joining you in contesting the idea of home.
Okay, and we have two questions. First one is from Abiola, and then we'll move over to Marloes. Abiola, what would you like to ask?
Yes, I was also toying with this at home issue. I'm still a little, I don't know if I'm very satisfied with the terminologies used, because in our experience, there seems to be a lot of, they overlap in a way that is confusing. On the one hand, you know, the beautiful picture you've shown, internationalization in the sense of having a window into another world that impacts your own understanding of yours. For example, going to spend a month in Japan will teach you more than you could ever read in 1,000 books about another way of being. And I think that is an experience that students who have gone abroad, they come back fundamentally changed and understand that the paradigm that they once inhabited is not as watertight as they may have thought it was. And there's a certain openness that comes with this kind of exposure. That's on the one hand. And on the other hand, you speak about problems that have a global character: race, diversity, gender issues, the environment, social inequality. Those are issues that you find at the community level. So at home, we can have those issues, but you know, as real problems within our communities, and also we have them at the international level. So I'm kind of torn between these two perspectives. The kind of learning you get from having windows into new worlds, and I don't see how you can have that unless you go abroad. Okay, I don't see how you can understand, you know, how the Japanese never say what they mean unless you've actually experienced that in person. You can read about it, but it's very different to as a learning experience. So it's I think internet, when we speak of it as a sort of a physical location, I don't think it does justice to what you're trying to convey. And when you speak about it also in terms of the complexity of problems and preparing students to be able to integrate into this global knowledge sphere, it kind of loses out on the other aspect as well. I don't know if I'm making sense here, but it's, and I'm listening to the two of you, and I'm looking at Jos's interpretation, which of course, you know, we work in the same place. So Jos, it's that kind of not very clear, discussions that I sometimes come across from a curriculum perspective, and what direction to take.
I will be coming back to some of the issues you mentioned, but also with an eye on the clock. I can, for argument's sake, state that the example of your student going to Japan, that was probably a student who didn't need that, because what we know is that students who go abroad, before they leave, already have the mindset to change. Whereas the 90% of the students who do not go abroad do not go because their mindset is not open enough. There is an economic side to it, but we know that 90% of the students stay at home. So what they would learn abroad, they would have to learn at home. And I think if you give the example of Japan, at home in the city of The Hague, we also have Japanese professionals and a Japanese community. So what internationalization at home is trying to achieve is that the learning that would take place for some students, the mobile minority abroad, can take place for the non-mobile majority at home. So that's a very brief reaction, but I think we should continue our conversation.
And I'll just say that this is an incredibly important question, and you've implied very important parts about what Jos has said, that global learning is a developmental process. Yes, and we know that learning happens in the reflection. Learning happens in the reflection upon the experience. At FIU, it was our students who said, I am in a classroom sitting next to 50, 100 other students who have many different ways of interpreting what is happening in the classroom. And I can learn from and with those people who are right next to me. But my classroom learning experience is not enabling me to do that. So we took our directive from our students who said that we are in the world right here and we're not connecting and reflecting upon that as the first step towards us deciding how we will then connect in greater and greater ways at greater and greater scales with other ways of thinking, doing, and being.
Okay, I know Marloes has another question, but Marloes, would it be okay if we first move on and then you'll be the first one in the next round to ask your question?
Of course, maybe it's already addressed in the next round.
Okay, thank you. So handing over back to Jos for the next part.
Yes, our final theme is how we make global learning work in our universities. I also have the golden circle, Stephanie.
I like that.
The why, the what, and the how, Simon Sinek. And we have sort of revamped the golden circle and said, well, why do we do this? We do this for 21st century skills or transversal skills or employability skills, whatever term you want to use, and for global citizenship. So our internationalization feeds into global citizenship. The what of our internationalized curricula are in the learning outcomes. So we believe that only when you have the international intercultural dimensions in the learning outcomes and in the assessment, that it becomes really a reality. And how do we do that? Well, we do that by our teaching and learning. And one of the tools, no, let me do this first. If we say that an internationalized curriculum for all students with integrated international and intercultural dimensions, then it means you have to go into the learning outcomes. And I have to think back to a remark that Abiola made earlier. What we focus on is in this plan, do, check, act cycle, the imagine phase. And that is where we, and I'm not alone in this, some other colleagues, Eveke, Claudia, Marloes also do that, do action research with academics in a particular discipline to map out what international and intercultural and all those big concepts like global citizenship, what they actually mean for that program and the students and the lecturers in that particular program. So we look at employability skills, transversal skills, and at the same time the learning outcomes. And so what we are trying to achieve, and this is not an easy task, is that internationalization and intercultural dimensions are fully integrated in the entire program from beginning to end. And then one of the ways that we do this is also working with collaborative online international learning. This is our project with South African universities, 5 European and 5 South African universities, in which we build capacity for COIL in South Africa, but it also allows us to bring these online collaborative practices into our own teaching and learning with partners that we otherwise would not have so much contact with, because we may call ourselves global, but that means to the most part Western. And so this is a way to bring Southern partners into the teaching and learning at the Hague. That's some of the operationalization. Stephanie?
Sure. I'll try to be concise, and also I'll let you know that I am able to stick around a little bit longer if some people want to. So our Universal Global Learning Initiative, at its heart, every single one of our 38,000 undergraduate students takes at least 2 global learning designated courses as a condition of graduation. And they also engage in integrative co-curricular activities. These courses, we have over 250 of them. They are embedded within every program of study. Some of them are required courses that students take in their program of study. In some programs, students are able to choose from a variety of electives, but every academic program in undergraduate education has looked at their curriculum and asked, where are there courses where global learning belongs, where we cannot teach this course appropriately and engage our students appropriately in their preparation, whether it's scholarly or more professional, unless we engage in this process as part of this particular course. The courses also go through the Faculty Senate curriculum approval process. We have a standing committee that not only looks at the initial proposal for the course, and it's the course number, so that all iterations of that course, all sections of that course, from here until the department decides that they might want to remove the global learning designation, will always be taught with that approach. And every 3 years after the course is taught, that committee also takes a look at the syllabi and assessments, and they also look to make sure that all of the faculty teaching those global learning designated courses have taken our professional development workshop for global learning. And integrative activities also happen on campus, in the community, nationally and abroad, because as was mentioned before, global learning happens at different scales. Yes. So if we'll turn to the next slide, you probably want an eye into what is the requirement for a global learning course. So we have 3 graduation level global learning outcomes towards which we are designing all of these experiences for our students. The first is global awareness, and that's a knowledge of the world's complexity and interrelatedness at local, international, intercultural, and global scales. Each course that gets a global learning designation has its own course-related global awareness outcome. So those faculty are asking, where is there complexity and interrelatedness in this course, in the types of problems that we're grappling with? Sometimes they're problems of the discipline, like how do we share data? Or they're problems of the profession. What are the different ethical or policy-related issues that we're grappling with? And sometimes they're more community-related, or dealing with the problems of development of the SDGs. Global perspective is the ability to construct a multi-perspective analysis of an issue. And this is really more an outcome that is talking about group dynamics. Because as we said before, no one person can be able to see the world from all perspectives, but how can each person connect different perspectives and be able to transcend their own through seeing the world through the eyes of the other, even if they aren't embedded in that other culture. And then the last one is global engagement, a greater willingness to engage with diverse others in complex problem solving, in making sense of divergent and diverse ways of seeing and doing and being. So somewhere in the course, we're going to design experiences that are designed to develop those learning outcomes. And we're going to ask ourselves, how do we know that our students are growing in these ways? We're going to use some traditional assessments, but also more authentic task-based assessments. We have all global learning courses must engage in collaborative learning activities. And then also we need to engage our students with, and sometimes produce, diverse content with diverse perspectives. That content can sometimes, as I was saying, be content that our students are producing. Because when our students are looking at emergent issues, there is no journal article. There is no textbook written to help our students understand certain issues. So sometimes they need to produce the content in order to understand the issues that they're grappling with. And yes, we also engage with COIL, Collaborative Online International Learning, as just another way of doing global learning. We have global learning designated courses that are face-to-face, solely campus-based, of course not right now, that are hybrid, that are using online and face-to-face, the fully online, and also some of our study abroad courses are designated global learning, but not all of them, because not all of them engage in this kind of diverse and collaborative problem solving. I'll stop there.
Okay, many thanks for that, Stephanie and Jos as well. And I'm a bit conscious of time too, as it's 1 minute to 4. And I know that some people have already left, and there might still be quite a few questions. So for those of you who've got a few minutes to spare, Stephanie, you already indicated that you have a little bit more time as well, maybe Jos too, so we can still ask a few questions. If you do have to go, then I'd just like to thank you for joining. Might also be interested in a new series that we're going to run soon, really on what does global learning, or in our case internationalization at home, look like in practice at the Hague University. So we'll be starting a series of In Conversation with practitioners from the Hague University, talking about some of the practices that they have initiated, and with plenty of time and opportunity to ask questions. Very short sessions of 30 minutes. And the first one will start on the 15th of June at 4 o'clock, but more information is to follow. So once again, thank you for joining, and I'd like to open up the floor for questions. And I promise to go back to Marloes, first of all. So Marloes, I see you're still with us.
Yeah, hi, thank you very much for this really fascinating presentation. It really triggered me. I really like it. I really like the focus on perspective taken, and also broadening from intercultural, international to, well, different sorts of perspectives, also interdisciplinary. But when you talked about your, well, I'll also switch my camera. When you talked about your definition of global learning, and also in the Golden Circle, it was very much grounded in a research university, I felt. Very much on knowledge creation, addressing global issues. And I was really curious how we as a University of Applied Sciences would translate that kind of issues to more applied setting. And I think you also already answered it for a bit. But I was curious how you think about that and how my colleagues think about that.
You know, that's so interesting, because in the States, this idea of global learning is less embraced by the research universities and the elite universities, and more embraced by institutions that look like mine and yours, and especially our community colleges and state colleges, because it acknowledges that it is for all, and that all of our global learning is only as good as all of perspectives that are brought to bear, and that the privileged knowledge that exists in the world is that of people who are experiencing different issues in ways that we simply cannot read about in books. It's not about the other, it is about us.
Yeah.
So in the States, our elite and research universities are still stuck in the mindset of we have to go and be there, and that it's about leaving. It's about leaving rather than it's about connecting and gathering. It's about otherness, rather than the fact that we are the other to someone else.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. It really made me think.
And Marloes, you also called upon all of us to see what we think of this particular issue. So how can we, how does it translate into a applied sciences setting? So is anyone who would like to react to your question?
Abiola?
Okay.
Well, I have a law background, and I know that in research universities, we are confronted with pretty, should I say, static curricula, where the room to maneuver and bring in these kind of ideas has to still fit within a very fixed prism. So there is actually, in my experience, much more room in curriculum development to, go into these kind of areas and design experiences for our students, which you would not find in a standard conservative curriculum. So I actually feel that my experience anyway has been that there's quite a bit of room within the way we structure our competence-based education. That we're speaking to competences, and that's a much easier link to issues about awareness and perspective than the more cognitive heavy, theory heavy type of curricula.
Okay, Laurence, you raised your hand.
I have to put my microphone on. Yes, thank you, Stephanie, again. About the global learning and the outcomes and how you integrate this in your curriculum. And I would like to ask a question. When do you think that global learning starts to become global citizenship? Because I think my problem is we are working with so many concepts that sometimes we lose it a little bit. So I was curious about your answer about it, and perhaps we could further elaborate on it. I have my answers, but I was wondering what kind of answers you would have.
This was a huge debate within our institution because in the beginning of our initiative, as we were writing our outcomes, words such as tolerance, respect, sustainability, justice were part of those learning outcomes, because we were thinking about what does a global citizen do? And it just became our faculty, and as well as our students, just said, no, we're not, this is not about teaching people what to do. This is about, and it's not teaching people what to think. It's about teaching people how to think. And so we simply define global citizenship as the interconnectedness of our three global learning outcomes. Once a person has an understanding that there are rights and responsibilities that are by virtue of birth, but once an individual understands that well-being is deeply interconnected at multiple scales, that there are rights and responsibilities that we take on through our willingness to engage with different perspectives. It is a mindset, global citizenship. We don't assess for global citizenship in terms of what's a survey, or because as an institution, we feel that that's deterministic. It's criterion based. We observe our students acting as global citizens. We connect we lift the stories and we can and we collaborate, but we don't define this is what a global citizen must do in order to be one. It's very much, we think of it as a mindset. We're heavy on the process of global learning and light on defining what a global citizen is, because the way a person embodies that mindset is, that's where we feel we'll get into trouble.
Okay, I think Marloes has another issue to raise, and Abiola as well. So maybe we can take these as the last two questions.
Yeah, sorry. When you say that you observe your students becoming global citizens by working on their mindset like this, what does this look like concretely in your curriculum? I'm really curious about that as an educator and also as an educational developer. How do you make that concrete for your academics and your students?
Yeah, I guess because you're used to having Jos around, you can ask him in the halls or online, because I feel like I'm speaking too much, but I'll be happy to. Okay, and Jos has raised his hand, wants to say things too. What was the term that you used earlier, Jos, about using the perspectives of the past to presentism, basically, like say that. One of the ways that we are observing our students' global citizenship is their desire to lead within our institution and within our community. So our students are saying here, they're identifying issues within the campus, within the classroom, within the community, and starting new initiatives. They're asking more. I mean, this is increased by light years since 2000. The number of clubs, organizations, the number of students who are venturing forth of their own leadership. And we're finding these things out afterwards, right? So it's not, that is where we're really seeing global citizenship in action. It's what we can't control for. Sometimes it makes me a little bit crazy that we create these learning outcomes and then we're counting how many times of that. They're the things that we've predetermined are the defined behaviors and actions. But that's us putting our view of the world onto our students. And right now is a really interesting moment because so many faculty are saying, how do I do my course online? How do I do these assignments? And we've been saying to faculty, ask your students, ask them, what is the situation that you're in? How do you want to handle this? And that ability to do that is really what that I think is the best evidence that we're making a difference. The things that we never intended that are happening.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I think Marloes, I think we'll be seeing a little bit more of Stephanie because we also expressed an intention to organize another online event where the faculty academics of both our institutions could actually share what does it look like in practice, right? So that is what we would like to organize pretty soon. Let me just check if Jos, did you want to add anything to what was just discussed, or can I first go to Abio?
I just wanted to briefly frame the discussion into our traditional view of competence as knowledge, skills, and attitude. And at the University of Applied Sciences, we've been focusing heavily on skills, not so much on knowledge, unless it is necessary for those skills. But I think there is an issue with with attitude, if we say our graduates are creative and flexible, etc., are they really, or are we promising something that we hope they are? And when we talk about global citizenship, which section of that belongs with the skills that are assessed, and which with attitudes that we find much more difficult to assess? So I think it is a discussion that might be worth redoing with our background the last 25 years in competence-based education, and look at it from that perspective.
Yeah, quite right. Thank you for that addition, Jos. Can I move on to Abiola?
Yes, I really liked what you said about the learning is in the reflection. I'm happy to share at some later point, how I have done it. I think the challenge really has been how to create a safe space for students to start on this, journey, basically. And I think also when it comes to assessment, the challenge there is to realize that everybody's story is authentic. There's no pass fail for your, for this growing awareness. So I really appreciate, what you've said, and I'll be very curious as to, you still have to have some kind of assessment process. So I have an assessment process, which is a kind of a journaling, my story, kind of a process. But I am curious as to, maybe you could share this at a later time, how, your assessment tools, and I'm not using this in a deterministic way at all. I'm saying how can a student, have something to gauge the process. It's, there's no pass or fail, if you understand what I mean.
Yes, I do, because it is how I think about the concept of assessment. So I think from a backward curriculum design mindset, what is it that we want our students to know and be able to do? What are these essential, lasting knowledge, skills, and disposition that go beyond this course that we want our students to achieve? And then we ask ourselves as faculty, but also just as people, how am I going to know that my students are achieving these things? And and that's everything from the sparkle in an eye, the willingness to ask a difficult question or to be vulnerable in the classroom. It's how many of my students are coming to my office hours, how many of them are working harder and doing things beyond what I asked them to do, to the percentage correct out of 20, right? Or what does the design of this building look like, or the argument that a student makes in a persuasive paper, or the verve with which they make a speech. I mean, it is a huge spectrum by which we gather evidence that our students are thinking differently, and that this knowledge, especially global awareness, and it's not something that you can assess. The ability to conceptualize the world's complexity and interrelatedness. This is it's a cognitive attribute that you really can't you can't hit it with a measuring stick, because the world is constantly emerging. But the ability to get to that first level of awareness that there's much more going on here than I realize. I know there's something else going on. I just don't know what it is. So I need to engage with others and other ways of seeing this thing so that I can understand better. That's the essence of global learning. That's the essence of global citizenship.
Thank you.
I'll step off my soapbox now.
I'm very passionate.
I get very.
Your microphone is out.
Thank you. We have one last question, and then we should really wrap up. Laurence.
Yes, I would like to add, but perhaps Stephanie and Jos, we can discuss this in other ways, because I think there are more aspects than the three when you want to tackle really global citizenship. And I really agree with you, Stephanie, that we cannot measure it because it's what's happening in the classroom between the students and the teacher, but also what's happening at your university. So a lot of kinds of process that enable students to engage and participate. And this is very difficult to tackle very well. And I think we shouldn't do it. And sometimes global citizenship is perhaps not so much on solving problems, but knowing how to create them and to challenge our students to discuss and to think about them and to act and engage and things like that. But I think it's important when we really want to discuss global citizenship is that the way we frame the content and the way the kind of the kind of topics you discuss and the aspects of the topics, how you discuss them, because I cannot imagine that you handle a topic, a societal issue without discussing rights and responsibility, or discussing participation, of identity and things like that. So I think there are some ingredients that we could define about how, when are you giving students the possibility to have a view of what global citizenship could be, of how they can enact it within a global learning setting. Just some thoughts, so perhaps we could.
Well, how we design global learning across different disciplines, different disciplinary families, the way in, the door in, is one of my favorite things to talk about. We have Melanie Agnew, who is now at Westminster College. I created a kind of like a distillation of her work about global learning in she called it internationalization of the curriculum in different disciplinary families. It's in the book. But the different doorways into the different types of problems and issues that we grapple with in different types of courses is very important. And also, this is a new bit of writing that I've been doing. I have it kind of on my blog, and I can share that with you, which is how do we organize? What is the organizing structure of diverse of everything that's happening in our course, right? We can organize things according to scale. We can organize things according to the relationship between the local and the global. We can organize things. How do we help our students conceptualize complexity? That is a real challenge, and it has to do with the way we design the course and how we lead students through thinking through increasingly more complex ideas and bring in increasingly more divergent ideas, but we need to enable them to have some kind of attractive force so that they can, you do have to distill it in some way and organize complex ideas in some way in order to reconceptualize. So those two design aspects, I think, are really important and interesting.
And Jos?
Yeah, maybe just a remark about the disciplines. We have some researchers into disciplines and internationalization here. Stephanie, Eveke and Claudia are both looking at disciplinary differences in internationalization at home in our university. And they also work together with Pune Eftekari from Lund University, who's doing a PhD on this topic in Groningen. So we have a new topic for a new big conversation. And in general, we can say that when one of us retires, this discussion will still be raging. Welcome to the world of international higher education.
Exactly.
Well, that's a comforting thought, Jos. We will not get bored at all. And I think that we just got started on this conversation, as you pointed out as well, Jos. So it was great having both of you sharing your insights and providing us with such a lot of food for thought. As I said, this is the start of many more wonderful initiatives. So indeed, let's continue to connect and collaborate. Thank you, Jos and Stephanie. And thank you all who stayed for such a long time after finishing the big conversation, and stay tuned for the next one. So bye for now.
Thank
and hopefully
Thank you very much. I really enjoyed this. Thank you. Bye.
Ciao.
Thanks, Stephanie.
Thank you, Jos.
Yeah, thank you, Stephanie,
Rebecca.
Jos. It was great. I so enjoyed it. Could do this every
fun.
day. Yes, absolutely. I think it was really very thought-provoking, and yeah, it was just wonderful to listen to both of you and the questions from the participants, and yeah, really enjoyed it. Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Have a lovely evening. I'm now going to go to my office meeting.